Today I want to talk to you about the straddle jump to handstand, just to offer a few progressions, a few tips, a few concepts that can hopefully help you out in your practice. This is a very elegant and beautiful entry to handstand if done correctly. It also helps to serve as a precursor for the handstand press, because even though it's not the same thing, the movements are very similar and it allows you to do more repetitions. It involves a lot of flexibility and coordination as well. And as always, disclaimer, this is not the ultimate method. This is not top 10 tricks to get you your best handstand. These are just thoughts based on my own experience, my own progressions, my own training, and my own teaching. So straddle jump to handstand, let's get into it. Flexibility wise, it's the same goes for press handstand. You don't have to be super flexible, but the better your pancake and middle splits and pike are, the better this is going to look, the more smooth and efficient it can be. So if your pancake is somewhere here, you can still do the straddle jump to handstand. It's just not going to look as good. When you have that hip flexibility, that doesn't mean it's necessarily going to look good, but it means you have the potential to make it look a lot better, a lot more aesthetically pleasing. Same thing, so for starting position, if you can put your hands flat on the floor with your legs straight, that's good. If not, you can bend your legs a little bit and then just use that jump to straighten your legs. That's absolutely fine as well. Again, it's one of those things, you don't have to have this full flexibility before starting it. It's just as you improve your flexibility, this will also improve as long as you're thinking about the right concepts. So first thing we're going to do is just the initial kind of progression and baby jump. So see where my position is. A lot of people like to do this. They like to go back. They like to start here. But why not just start with your hands already weighted? Again, this is not right or wrong. There are many ways to do it. It's just my personal progression. So rather than going back to go forward, I'm going to try to get my hips as high as possible and put weight into the hands. And at this point, I have actually more weight in my hands than on my feet, and my hips are high. It's not a press handstand. I'm not leaning my arms forward, but I want to get to the point that my arms are vertical, because if I start here and I jump, I can't make a handstand. If I start here and then go here, why do I need to do all these extra movements? I like minimalism, so the less movement you can do, the better it's going to be, and it's actually going to look better to most people's eyes when there's less extraneous movement. So we're going to start with the weight on the hands, and then really simple, just going to jump, right? Jump, come down, jump, keep the legs low. It's not about height, it's about keeping the arms in the same position throughout the jump. So you see what happens? My arms never move. It's not heavy on the shoulders, but what's not happening are these two things. Number one, falling back, that means your shoulders are behind your hands. Number two, falling forward towards a planche. Also not good. We want the arms vertical, and just understanding how to jump. Spread the legs, straighten the legs, keeping the arms vertical. Now here's also where you want to practice leg extension. So as soon as, I have issues with this too, sometimes my aesthetics are not as clean as they could be. The moment your legs are off the ground, boom, straight legs, pointed toes. It's optional, but it's gonna definitely look better if you do that. And then what's also happening is two different things. This is where it gets a little bit more complex. So the legs are going up, but they're also going out. So as the hips rise up, the legs also go out, because what's going to end up happening in the full straddle jump to handstand is the legs are going to make a circle like this. So it's that idea, it's not just the legs going up, but up and out. So do a lot of these. This is a really good introductory drill. Weight on the hands. My starting position, I don't have my feet together, but they're not super wide either. My feet are about hip width, and I'm just keeping my shoulders in the same place, getting these little moments of airtime. All right, with the initial jump out of the way, now is the time we start going towards the handstand, and now is when there's a little bit more complexity happening within the movement. So look at my starting position, right? If my hips go up, it's not going to get me to the handstand because my hips are not on top of my hands. I don't have a vertical line. So the thought, and this is a really important cue, this helps me so much with presses, with jumps, with many different things, is my hips should actually be going forward. As they go forward, they're going to go up as much as they need to because they're not going to go up that much, but they have to go forward. They have to go forward to take me to the handstand, but they also have to go forward to counterbalance the weight of my legs, which is on the other side, because we want to keep the arms vertical the whole time. So this is the next thought. We keep the legs down. We don't lift the legs. That's going to depend on your flexibility, and we try to get the hips forward, and this is where it gets a little bit more complex as well. So as the hips are going forward, my shoulders are starting somewhere here in my starting position. That's not my ideal handstand shape. I want my shoulders to be somewhere here in the handstand. So as my hips go forward, I'm also opening my shoulders at the same time. And we're not trying to balance, we're not trying to stay in a handstand, we're just focusing on the jump, getting to the position and making it more consistent. So the legs are gonna go wide, but they're gonna stay down, and the hips are gonna go forward, and my shoulders are always pushing down into the floor. So it's gonna look like this. So see, now my hips are going towards the handstand, and now watch what happens if I don't change my shoulder positions, right? So that's what happens if I keep my shoulders in the same place. It's fine, it's not wrong, but then my back tends to extend, my hips aren't going forward far enough, and I'm not in a straight handstand, which isn't wrong. Nothing wrong with not being in a straight handstand, but for this particular technique, we are looking for the open shoulders. You have to coordinate this, because if I open my shoulders too early, it's going to make me fall back. If I open my shoulders too late, it's going to make me fall forward. So there is a timing that you have to feel, and it's at the same time. It's as the hips go forward, my shoulders go back. And my legs are still in front of my body. So I'm not opening the legs yet. This is just focusing on the counterbalance between the hips and the shoulders. Now, many people have trouble getting their hips to go forward enough because remember, the legs are in front of the body, so you don't just want the hips directly on top of the hands, you actually want them a little bit in front, depending on your weight distribution between your butt and legs and your middle split flexibility. So here's a drill that you can try. It's very helpful, it's very subtle. Basically, I want only my butt to touch the wall. So I want my arms to maintain vertical. I don't want my head to touch because that's an artificial support that I don't have in my handstand. I don't want my shoulders to touch because that means I'm planching and leaning forward. So I just want to do that straddle jump, closed hip angle, only the butt touching the wall. So it's going to look, and I have a little bit of space. I have about 3 inches between my end of my finger and the wall. Something like that. So it's going to look like this. Very light, very gentle, only the butt touches. I keep my shoulders pressed down so that I'm focusing on opening the shoulders and getting my hip to go in the right place. Be gentle with this movement. This is very, very subtle, and what you don't want is that. So see how my shoulders lean forward into the wall? This would make you fall in your handstand, or it's just going to make you muscle it too much. And if you rely on using your leaning into the wall for support, that's not really going to help you that much with the actual freestanding variation. So once you understand that hip and shoulder position, the next step is just to finish it. So once you hit that closed straddle position, you're going to open the hips, close your legs. You can do this movement to help understand. So the legs are wide and then they close again. And this is really important because if your hips are not in the right place and you bring your legs up, it's just going to make you fall, right? Because this is, again, really common when people don't get their hips far enough and then they try to force closing the legs into the handstand and they fall back. So it's this idea that you always have the weight on top of your hands and there's a separation. It goes hips and then legs. You don't want it to happen at the same time. The better your flexibility is, the easier it's going to be to understand that. And this is also crucial in the press. So it's going to go hips, legs, hips, legs, as opposed to something like that where I'm leading with a heel drive. It's not a heel drive. It's the butt going first and then the legs following. And I'm not doing any kind of balance here. We don't need to do balance right now because the focus is on just getting the movement consistent. And what ends up happening a lot of the time when people try to balance too much is they fight and then they do this kind of thing, right? Because they don't get it right and then they just fight too much. That's fine if you're trying to fight for the balance, but the point here is to get the entry consistent and precise and smooth enough that you don't have to fight. And when you add the balance to that, the whole thing becomes smooth. So, just doing it over and over again. Hips, legs. I'm doing no balance. Right? I'm just trying to get consistent, hitting the position so that when I do balance, I just have to add a little bit. It's very smooth. It's not difficult to add the balance, but it's important to have that separation of working just the entry and then later connecting it to the balance instead of trying to work many things at once and then struggling with many things at once. Okay, common mistake, and I see this one a lot. It has to do with how much you allow yourself to think, and ultimately thinking is probably going to make you fail. So when you put your hands on the floor, don't rush, but don't wait too long. And that's those are the two manifestations of the same issue. Rushing is when people don't let themselves get set and then they try to, right? They try to go too soon. Like, no, take a moment. You just shook hands with the floor. You don't want to throw them right away. The other one is, again, it's just the opposite spectrum of the same issue, is people take too long. They take too much setup, and then they jump, and then the jump fails anyway. And a lot of the times the jump fails because of that setup. And I love using cats as analogies because they're genius beasts. But when a cat looks at a jump, there's like a very specific amount of time that they make for calculation. They look at the jump, they prep, and then they go. If they rush it, they probably miss. If they take too long and they start to do little shuffle steps, they also probably miss. So this is a very general tip, 2 to 3 breaths. Once your hands do all your thinking here, I'm not in my handstand when I'm thinking. As soon as my hands are on the floor, no more than 2 to 3 breaths of setup and then jump. If I take too long, I'm going to lose it because I'm going to start thinking, oh, I need to get my hips here. I need to do. You start thinking about what you're supposed to do instead of actually doing it. And if you go too fast, at least 1 breath. Like I've used this analogy of letting the water settle. It's like you just jumped into a pool of water. Don't add more waves. So if you go too fast, even if it's from standing, because this is going to help with press, right? Give yourself a moment, 1 beat, and then you can go. So that timing, it's a very subtle part of it, but it is important, understanding that timing. Now, even if you go from standing in one motion, I'm still having that moment where I put my hands on the floor. It just happens a little bit more fluid. I can go like this, and it looks like I just went from standing, but the reality is I just did this whole transition a little bit smoother. So it's always there. I always have this moment where I feel the weight on the hands, I feel the arms stacked vertical, and then I maintain that throughout the whole jump. And in reality, to break it down further, this is not a balance exercise, this is a marksmanship exercise. So there's 2 ways that you can train it, but ultimately the end goal is consistency. It's to be able to do the same straddle jump to handstand. If you do 10 in a row, I shouldn't be able to tell the difference between 1 and 3 and 5 and 7. They should all look very close to each other. The idea is repeatability in performance. So within using that marksmanship analogy, there's 2 ways that you can train this more than 2 ways. I'm just giving you 2 suggestions. So one is to do one at a time. Take a small break. You only have one. If you fail on the next one, you try to think about one thing that you can do better, one mistake that you can fix. So it's going to look like this. So, okay, what happened? I didn't jump far enough. My shoulders went back. So next one, I'm going to jump my hips forward further because you don't want to think about more than one thing. So it's like you do only one at a time. You take a small break, and in between those, you think, what could I do better? Well, that was pretty good. So my thought is to do the same thing. And you take a small break, enough to make yourself fresh. You can shake it out. You can take a walking lap if you want to. But we're just doing one at a time, and we're trying to be as accurate as possible, but not thinking too much. Like that. So one at a time. Now the second way that you can train this is the opposite. Again, marksmanship analogy, this would be a group. So maybe if you do one, you don't know what kind of consistency there is. You do one good one, then you do one shitty one. So how do you know which one is your average? So in this case, you would take a group, let's say a group of 5, and then you just go in a row, and then you can kind of take the average and you can think about it less, and then you can see which mistakes are more prevalent. So in this one, I keep my hands on the floor the whole time, and as soon as my feet touch the floor, I'm going back up again. Now you can take rest in between if you need to, but I prefer it like this. I prefer 5 in a row, and then relax, and then think about what you've done. So that's gonna look like this. So I'm going up. The moment my feet touch down, I'm already going up. So that would be the second way to train it. And again, repeating myself, but it's important, I'm training just the entry. That's it. Only getting into it. No balance, not trying to save it, just trying to do the same straddle jump. Consistent. When I have this consistent, especially if you start to get into a more advanced handstand practice, you're going to be wasting a lot of energy if you keep trying to catch yourself every time you go up. So having that consistency and efficiency in your entry, super important. In order to get that consistency and efficiency, a lot of times it's better to separate the entry from the balance. Isolate it as its own movement, work on it, and then bring it back when you have it smooth. So those are my thoughts on the straddle jump to handstand. I hope you found it useful. I hope it helps your practice. Again, these are just tips and suggestions. This is not the ultimate technique. But hopefully I've shared a perspective that maybe you didn't think about. And if I did, you can tell me in the comments below. You can like, share, subscribe, whatever. Let me know what other content you'd like to see. You can join me for online classes using the link below. Other than that, yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time.